The evolution of legal frameworks in societies reveals a pattern where initial minimal governance gives way to expansive regulatory structures, often culminating in forms of authoritarian control. This progression begins with basic principles of coexistence in sparse environments and escalates through community growth, introducing layers of laws that address increasing complexities. Judicial systems play a central role in this dynamic, determining when to intervene and when to abstain, while broad statutes enable subjective enforcement that amplifies state power. Concepts such as justiciability limit judicial involvement in matters deemed outside their scope, ensuring separation of powers, yet accusations of overreach arise when courts extend beyond clear legal bases. In advanced stages, enhancements like those for bias motivations transform minor infractions into severe offenses, illustrating how legal escalation erodes individual freedoms. Historical examples demonstrate how open frontiers foster informal norms, contrasting with densely populated areas where formal laws proliferate. In minimal law settings, unwritten codes emphasize mutual respect and personal responsibility, enforced through direct repercussions rather than institutional mechanisms. As populations expand, the need for protection and standards justifies additional regulations, but this often leads to overlapping rules and arbitrary applications. Doctrines like void for vagueness challenge overly broad laws, requiring clarity to prevent discriminatory enforcement, yet many statutes survive by incorporating contextual elements. The transition from self-reliance to dependency on state authority marks a shift toward high-law societies, where trust diminishes and coercion increases. This trajectory underscores the tension between order and liberty, where initial necessities morph into tools of control. In high-trust communities, fewer laws suffice due to shared norms, while fragmented societies accumulate regulations to mediate distrust. Economic interventions, cultural shifts, and technological advancements accelerate this process, enabling micromanagement and selective prosecutions. Lawfare emerges as a strategy to weaponize legal systems against opponents, further entrenching tyrannical tendencies. Understanding this escalation provides insight into how societies move from autonomy to regimentation, highlighting the risks of unchecked legal expansion. Judicial limits and overreach. Justiciability serves as a foundational principle restricting courts from ruling on matters outside their constitutional authority, ensuring they address only actual cases and controversies. Doctrines such as standing require plaintiffs to demonstrate personal injury, while ripeness prevents premature adjudication and mootness dismisses resolved disputes. The political question doctrine specifically applies when issues are committed to other branches of government or lack judicial standards, as seen in cases involving impeachment procedures or foreign policy. Courts invoke this to avoid encroaching on executive or legislative domains, maintaining separation of powers. Accusations of judicial abuse arise when rulings extend into areas without clear statutory grounding, often labeled as overreach or activism. This occurs through broad interpretations that create new policies, intruding into policymaking reserved for elected officials. Examples include decisions on administrative actions where courts are perceived to legislate from the bench, stretching precedents beyond original intent. Such practices erode public trust in the judiciary, fostering perceptions of bias in partisan contexts. In practice, even absent specific laws, courts apply common law or constitutional principles to resolve disputes, determining applicable rules rather than abstaining entirely. This flexibility allows precedent setting in ambiguous areas, but critics argue it enables unwarranted expansions of authority. The balance between restraint and intervention defines judicial legitimacy, with overreach contributing to broader regulatory growth by validating expansive legal interpretations. The regulatory state in contemporary America. America exemplifies a regulatory state where broad statutes encompass virtually all interactions, creating an environment of pervasive legal oversight. Laws such as those for breach of peace, disorderly conduct, and distracted driving employ subjective criteria, allowing enforcement based on situational interpretations. Incitement and harassment provisions similarly permit wide application, turning ordinary conduct into potential offenses. Public nuisance, jaywalking, loitering, and trespassing rules further illustrate how movement and presence can be criminalized under vague terms. Hate crime enhancements amplify this by increasing penalties for underlying offenses motivated by bias, applicable to misdemeanors like disorderly conduct or harassment. Proving bias relies on evidence such as statements or symbols, but subjectivity in motive determination raises concerns about arbitrary escalation. Statutes in various states upgrade classifications or add sentences when bias is established, transforming minor infractions into felonies. This layering intensifies the regulatory framework, where any interaction risks severe consequences. Despite constitutional protections like due process, the combination of vague laws and enhancements fosters a system of potential overreach. Challenges under the void for vagueness doctrine have invalidated overly broad ordinances, requiring fair notice and preventing discriminatory application. Cases striking down annoying conduct or loitering provisions highlight judicial efforts to curb subjectivity, yet many laws persist by incorporating intent or disruption elements. This structure contributes to a perception of authoritarian tendencies, where legal discretion enables control over daily life. Concepts of minimal and no-law societies. Anarchism represents the concept of no laws, advocating a stateless society without coercive government, distinguishing imposed laws from voluntary norms. In such systems, disputes resolve through mediation or community consensus, emphasizing mutual aid and reciprocity. True anarchism avoids chaos by relying on social rules enforced non-hierarchically, as in hunter-gatherer groups where customs maintain order without formal authority. Basic laws focus on fundamental prohibitions against harm, aligned with a non-aggression principle that forbids initiation of force or fraud. Minimal states limit government to protecting life, property, and contracts, functioning as night watchmen without broader interventions. Classical liberalism endorses governing least, prioritizing negative liberties and allowing voluntary interactions to handle most affairs. Minimal law societies contrast with high law ones in composition and freedom. Cohesive, high-trust groups with shared values require fewer regulations, relying on informal norms for order. Freedom flourishes with reduced legal burdens, promoting innovation and autonomy. High-law societies, often diverse and low-trust, accumulate vague rules, curtailing liberties through constant oversight and fostering dependency on state mechanisms. The Wild West as a minimal law paradigm. The Wild West embodied a frontier society with minimal formal laws, where settlers in vast territories relied on unwritten codes for coexistence. The Code of the West emphasized hospitality, fair play, loyalty, and respect for property, enforced through reputation and mutual deterrence. Violations invited swift repercussions, such as duels or ostracism, reflecting a system of personal responsibility in isolation. Frontier justice characterized enforcement, with vigilance committees addressing crimes like rustling in the absence of official authority. This ad hoc approach maintained order through community action, though it risked mob rule. The law of the frontier blended customary norms with natural principles, prioritizing self-reliance and direct resolution over distant governance. East Coast settlements imported structured legal systems from Europe, contrasting with westward migration into open lands where necessity dictated basic rules. As territories formalized, federal authority gradually imposed statutes, transitioning from high-trust, minimal regulation environments to more controlled structures. This paradigm illustrates how informal standards sustain freedom in sparse, cohesive settings before escalation begins. Escalation of legal frameworks and lawfare. Legal escalation commences in solitary expanses with no rules, progressing to basic norms in small communities focused on core protections. Larger groups introduce laws for standards and security, attracting diversity that necessitates further regulations. This leads to a regulatory state with overlapping statutes, enhancements, and subjective applications, where minor acts escalate via added penalties. Advanced stages feature retroactive laws, exemptions for elites, and stricter measures for others, enabling unequal enforcement. Lawfare utilizes legal systems strategically to hinder opponents, accelerating control through litigation and selective prosecution. Authoritarian legalism emerges, employing laws as power tools rather than equitable constraints. The ultimate form is totalitarianism, where pervasive laws regiment every aspect, from routines to beliefs, justified as protection. Historical trajectories, such as from revolutionary chaos to dictatorial regimes, demonstrate this slide, with centralized authority stifling autonomy through comprehensive oversight. Contributing factors to legal overreach. Economic interventionism drives escalation, as initial subsidies and controls expand into central planning that requires coercion. Crises justify retroactive measures and elite exemptions, attracting power seekers who consolidate authority. This path stifles markets and increases dependency, leading to inefficiency and oppression. Cultural erosion from self-reliance to fragmentation necessitates more laws to bridge distrust, replacing community vigilance with bureaucracy. As frontiers close, traditional values fade, inviting state arbitration that morphs into control, diminishing trust further. Technological advancements enable surveillance and micromanagement, from records to digital tracking, facilitating arbitrary and retroactive applications. Power dynamics allow elites to exploit systems for gain, weaponizing laws against rivals while securing privileges, entrenching tyranny through selective mechanisms. Conclusion: the inevitable tension, liberty versus legal expansion. The historical and conceptual progression from minimal governance to pervasive regulatory tyranny illustrates a fundamental tension within human societies. The pursuit of order inevitably risks the erosion of individual liberty. In sparse, high-trust environments, informal norms and personal accountability suffice to maintain coexistence, allowing substantial freedom without the weight of codified enforcement. As communities expand and complexities multiply, the introduction of basic laws for protection transitions into expansive regulatory frameworks that address every conceivable interaction. This shift, while initially justified as necessary for security and fairness, frequently culminates in systems where subjective statutes and layered enhancements enable arbitrary state intervention, diminishing the space for autonomous action. Judicial mechanisms, intended to constrain such overreach through doctrines like justiciability and void for vagueness, often prove insufficient against the momentum of legal proliferation. Courts may abstain from political or hypothetical matters, yet their interpretive flexibility in ambiguous cases contributes to precedent that further entrenches broad authority. The result is a society where minor conduct routinely escalates through bias-based penalties or discretionary prosecution, transforming everyday life into a landscape of legal peril. High-law environments, characterized by low interpersonal trust and heavy reliance on bureaucratic oversight, stand in stark contrast to the self-reliant paradigms of frontier existence. Economic centralization, cultural fragmentation, and technological surveillance accelerate this trajectory, each factor reinforcing the others in a cycle of increasing control. Interventions that begin as limited responses to market failures or social discord expand into comprehensive planning, while digital tools render micromanagement feasible on an unprecedented scale. Elites exploit these developments through lawfare and selective exemptions, consolidating power under the guise of legal necessity and turning protective institutions into instruments of domination. Ultimately, the preservation of genuine freedom demands deliberate restraint against unchecked legal growth. Societies that prioritize essential protections while fostering informal norms and self-reliance demonstrate the viability of balanced order. Without vigilant limits on regulatory expansion, the slide toward totalitarianism becomes probable, where comprehensive regimentation supplants individuality and autonomy yields to perpetual state supervision. Recognizing this pattern serves as both a cautionary analysis and a call to safeguard the conditions that sustain liberty against the inexorable pull of escalating authority.